In the year 2012, it is John Izzo's hope that we humans will stop moaning and groaning about big and little events and become part of the solution, even though we are herd animals at heart. Izzo says it's time to stick our necks out, take some initiative, and step up. John is a best-selling author, speaker, and motivator, a leadership consultant with soul, who wrote the popular 5 Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die. It is my pleasure to welcome John Izzo back to Studio 4 to tell us more about his new book, Stepping Up.
Fanny, great to be here again.
Nice to see you again. How do you define stepping up?
You know, I define stepping up very simply. It's seeing a need and deciding you're the person who can, should, and will do something about it. So it's really seeing a need and saying, not what can someone else do, but what can I do about that? And that's the big shift that stepping up and taking responsibility is really about.
But as you know so well, we always have an excuse. Not my job, not my position, not interested, too busy, what else?
Well, you know, it's interesting, 2 things. One is, I share in the book research over the last 40 years about how university students are becoming more and more external in their locus of control, meaning they believe the things that influence their destiny, as well as the world, are increasingly out of their hands. So for one thing, we're feeling more and more impotent, like we can't change these big things that impact us. And the second thing is, I think people feel increasingly like, well, what can one person do? In fact, we surveyed people for stepping up. Why don't you step up and create change? Number 1 reason, I'm only one person. It won't make any difference if I do.
It's understandable, as we just talked to Jonathan Manthorpe about the nuclear program in Iran, and if you're in your little backyard in Toronto thinking, what can I do? I can take care of the squirrel in the tree or the raccoon, but it's very difficult for me to stop the making of nuclear weapons in Iran. However, there must be something I can do.
Well, you know, one of the interesting things, you know, given that the number 1 reason we don't step up is because we feel it won't matter if I do, 2 things. One is, I talk in the book about 2 concepts that we forget. One is what I call aggregate influence. So I'll use a simple example. What difference does it make if I don't use a plastic shopping bag at the grocery store? You could say, well, it doesn't make any difference if Fanny and John do that. But imagine now millions of people aggregately making that choice every day. What difference does it make if I try to use your example around Iran, to build more understanding between religions or between people, to dispel myths and to get to actually know people who are different than me? Maybe it doesn't make any difference at all. Now imagine the aggregate of millions of people all over the world deciding to take that simple step. And the second is what I call the responsibility ripple. And that is that in my book, I feature all these stories of people who stepped up to create change. And again, what you see is when one person steps up, it creates a ripple. And suddenly other people are challenged to step up. So we forget those 2 things when we say, I'm not powerful. We forget the power of those 2 concepts.
Absolutely. The great Bobby Kennedy quote in the book, it is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice. He sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and women too.
Exactly.
We send out tiny ripples. The priest in the book, a father, Irish priest.
Yeah, Jamie Crow in São Paulo. You know, it's in a wonderful chapter in the book called Do Something, Do Anything, because, you know, one of the things when people are thinking about changing something, whether it's in their company or in the world, they think, well, I don't have a grand plan. Well, I found most of these people had no grand plan. Father Jamie Crow, a good example. He's a priest in São Paulo, Brazil. The United Nations called it the most violent place on earth, with a murder rate greater than war zones like Afghanistan. The police wouldn't even go into this community except for night raids, you know, like almost like guerrilla troops. And Jamie Crow just began, his first step was he just did a march to a cemetery, a march for the defense of life, he called it, and got a few thousand people to march to a cemetery where many of these murder victims, mostly teens, were buried. And then he started just meeting once a week, a group of citizens saying, how could we change this community? That's all he did. Let's get together once a week and talk about this. By several years into it, there were literally almost 1,000 people meeting every week, government officials, police officers, common citizens, gang members. And within 4 years, they literally transformed this slum back into a vibrant community. But it all began by one person stepping up saying, let's just start to talk about the future.
Right.
Again, it shows the power of this ripple that we talked about.
And one person stepping over too many dead bodies, like a dead body in a doorway, not going to happen anymore. I must do something about it. But you say, and it's a very good concept, be naive and be optimistic.
Yeah.
Rex Weiler, who's one of the original Greenpeacers, a pal of mine, and many of the Greenpeacers were, and they were slightly crazy doing what they did. I thought, no, like you're going to take on the whaling commission, in that little boat?
Yeah, you know, one of the, as you know, I tell that story in the book, and it's in a chapter called Only Naive People Ever Change the World. And I think the first thing is you actually have to believe that things can be different. So as you say, here a group of hippies and journalists and ecologists in Vancouver think whales are on the brink of extinction. Someone has to do something. So they come up with this idea to confront the whaling fleet in rubber zodiacs.
Sure.
And everyone said, how naive. But it led to a ripple that helped stop the whale hunt. And again in the book, you see these stories of people who were naive enough to think, well, maybe things could be different. I say in the book, for every person who wound up changing something, there were people throwing grenades at them saying, you'll never change anything. Well, you know, and in fact, we have that voice in ourselves too, and it's not our friend.
And as you know, the original Greenpeacers themselves, some are gone, the great Bob Hunter, but they all say now that they're a little older. I can't believe we did that.
Right, it was crazy. It was crazy.
Completely crazy, but look at the result.
Yeah.
You know, and Greenpeace International today and all of that and what was built from some hippies who were very smart.
Yeah,
were smart hippies.
You know, another local hero I talk about in the book, Ken Lotier, of who started United We Can on the downtown east side.
Yes.
A homeless man, a dumpster diver here in Vancouver, concerned about all the garbage that wasn't being recycled and the way homeless people were treated with indignity. And then one day a United Church minister heard him complain about it and asked him a very powerful question. Ken, that's great, but what would you do about it?
And you know, feeling that you can do something about it is at the crux of that. And say you're in a big corporate building and you work with a lot of big corporate poobahs in big corporate buildings, and you think, I can't go to the president. I have this wonderful idea, but he's not going to want to see me, or she's not going to want to see me.
Yeah, it's very
Tell me about the Starbucks girl.
Yeah, one of the great stories in the book, and as you know, I work with a lot of companies, and companies that can create an environment where people can step up, have a real competitive advantage. And it's a wonderful story. A lot of people know Starbucks Frappuccino was a huge profit maker for them, as well as adding to our waistlines. But what most people don't know is it almost never happened. The story behind the Frappuccino is two frontline workers and a manager of a small Starbucks in Santa Monica, California in the late 1990s see customers leaving in a hot summer to get a cold dessert coffee drink from a local competitor. They go to their regional manager and say, this is a great drink, we should do it. He goes and tastes it, says, I like it, all ice and $3.50. Goes to the senior team in Seattle. On a 7-to-1 vote, they say, no, we don't want to do it. But the bottom line is, the manager comes back, delivers that news. These frontline people, that frontline manager, are like a little dog on a bone. They keep calling every day. We've made a mistake. We have to do this. Even though they were told no, they start experimenting. They go get some blenders at a local supermarket and start making the drinks and offering it, even though the corporate office said no. Bottom line, within a month and a half, they had done $1 million of gross sales in those two little stores, and went back, of course, to Starbucks and said, look, fire us if you want to, but we think we've got a good idea here. And the rest is history. And hats off to Starbucks, because a company is successful if they allow people to step out of the lines. Those people not only didn't get fired, that Dina Campion, that store manager, is now the head of marketing for Starbucks internationally.
You see? So the renegade wins in many cases. But how do you train a boss or be a boss who says, I cannot solve this without your help, and encourage the people in the trenches to come to you, to help, like you give them some responsibility?
Yeah, for my book, Stepping Up, we actually surveyed 800 people. Why don't you step up at work? What do leaders do that get in the way? What struck me is the 3 top answers. Number 1, making decisions without seeking our opinion. So I talk in the book about just give people a seat at the table, give them input. The second thing is dismissing ideas without really considering them. And think about even at that Starbucks. Starbucks took a risk. They dismissed that idea without considering it. Thank goodness they changed their mind later. But leaders have to watch how quickly, well, we've tried that before, you know, that'll never work around here. And the third thing is creating a climate of fear. And it can be very subtle in a company where that little frown, that little thing, well, Fanny stepped out of the line. Let's make sure nobody else does that again. And so I have a whole chapter in the book, as you know, about how do you create that kind of climate, because it's so important.
It's so important. What do you call them? A constructive irritant or something?
Yeah, constructive irritants.
Constructive irritants.
Because one of them,
I'm a constructive irritant, and I want you to know, but it's very difficult because if you're a leader like that, they talk about you anyway, behind your back, and say, this is the stupidest decision this company has ever made.
Exactly.
Right? What are they thinking? What are they thinking? But the company's doing it for whatever reason.
Right.
It could be bottom line, but it could also just be change of management or something, and they make these big decisions, and you think, what are they thinking? We're on the ground here.
Yeah, and it's often ego. It's just ego. And you know, as you know, I talk about this constructive irritant. And one of the great myths at work, because I work with hundreds of companies, one of the great myths at work is that yes, people get ahead. But the reality is, I share in the book research that shows that people who actually get promoted and are more highly rated are what I call the constructive irritants. They challenge things like those Starbucks managers do, but they come with solutions, not fingers pointing out. And that's how you know you're a constructive irritant instead of a complainer.
So come with the answer. Don't just complain.
Yeah.
Very
and
important.
point in, not out. Yeah.
I knew you'd say that. John Izzo, our guest, stepping up his fifth book.
Fifth book, yeah.
Fifth book, How Taking Responsibility Changes Everything. We'll come back.